So everybody ready to start? Great.
Yes.
Okay, and we are recording. Great. Welcome everybody. So this is the second Isegoria session, and we would like to welcome for candidates who have been here. I'm missing one. Did somebody drop out? Oh, Germinal is still here. Yes. So welcome, and especially welcome to the viewers who are watching this online, live, and also the recorded version. So we named this session Isegoria. Isegoria is a Greek word, and it means equality in speaking. Equality so that everybody gets the same time to speak and express their opinion and their perspective. With that in mind, we organize these sessions. This is the second session, and this is an initiative that from DiEM25 members. And what we aim at is to give the space to all candidates, all CC candidates, to present their standpoint and their perspective on why they run for the CC, what they will do to make DiEM25 even better. And what we want is to see all the candidates interacting with each other live and to answer questions from the viewers. This is the first time we tried these sessions, so we ask for patience for any miscalculations. And importantly, let me say this one again, this comes from the base of the movement, and it is by no means, we do not aim to replace any current procedures on running for the CC. We are members who want to see all CC candidates and discuss with them and listen to the responses. So this is the second session, and we're joined today by four or five candidates. Costanza from DSC New York. Pawel, remind me which DSC you're from?
Pawel. I'm
Pawel.
the coordinator of the Green New Deal for Europe campaign, and I was involved in the policy development in London as well, in the UK.
Great. We're joined by Brice, who is in DSC Luxembourg, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Germinal, you are?
I'm based in Paris. I was a member of Génération during the electoral campaign for the European Union.
Great. And am I missing somebody?
Michele.
Oh, Michele. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I cannot see. And you're from?
I'm from a black hole, as you can see. I'm the coordinator and founder of DSC Verona 1, Verona 1 in
Great.
Italy.
Italians. So we have a third Isegoria session next Sunday or Saturday with more candidates, probably the last batch of candidates. And we have been trying really hard to reach and bring together all candidates. So any candidates that see these sessions and haven't joined yet, we welcome those to join us and talk with you next weekend. Before we begin, we would like to truly thank all the members of DiEM25 who made this possible. And there are more than 30 people behind the scenes who have worked on making these sessions work. Especially the German NC, the French NC, the Dutch NC, the UK NC, and also several members of the current CC. As well as many DSCs and activists who have helped and contributed to this effort. So the structure of this session will be the same as the first one. We will go with some opening remarks, about 1 minute from each candidate, and then we will talk about two topics. The Green New Deal for Europe and the Green New Deal within DiEM25, and also the internal structure of DiEM25 and the inner workings of our movement. For example, the role of the CC, the transparency, internal communications, etc. We want to hear from the candidates what their opinions, what their standpoints are, and what they would do specifically as members of the CC to promote everything, all the issues that we will be talking about. And finally, a reminder, this is not a competition, this is a friendly discussion, and we want to get things out of this discussion. So let's begin. 1 minute, about 1 minute to 2 minutes each candidate. So Costanza, do you want to start?
Sure. Thank you. So first of all, I wanted to thank you, Aris and Vincenzo, and all of you who organized this. I think this is a great initiative. I'm happy to hear that it was seen by 400 people, which it's great. And I think it's very important because it's what DM I think it's about. It's grassroots, it's activist, and it's discussing among ourselves, which is also what I would like the CC to do more, facilitating discussions between the activists, between the people, between the DSCs, between the DSCs at the NCs and the NCs and the CC. And I think this part is a little bit missing sometimes. So I'm Italian. I am one of the co-coordinators of the DSC New York, which is the first and most active DSC in North America. But we also try to be a center of aggregation for people in South America, Central America, and try to help them develop DSCs, which is so it has been interesting. It has been really, really great because there are a lot of people who are interested in both Europeans here, but also non-Europeans here are very interested in getting together, in making a network. They are very interested in the PI, the Progressive International. Then we'll talk more about this later probably. So yeah, so two things. I think that the strength of DM is its network. I think that we had we took a big hit in the last elections, but the network is healthy and it should be supported. So if I'm elected, I hope to do that.
Thank you, Costanza. Pawel.
Sorry, me?
Yes. Oh, did you mispronounce your name? Sorry for that.
Pawel, or you can use a V instead of a W in it.
Perfect.
So thank you very much. I'll second Costanza's thanks to you guys for organizing this. I think it's a fantastic initiative. I think it's worthwhile for all the candidates to have an opportunity to speak and express their views in front of the movement as a whole, or in front of as much of the movement as possible. I'm Pawel. As some of you might know, I am our Green New Deal for Europe campaign. Something that I worked with the CC on launching just before the European parliamentary elections, because we saw this very narrow window of opportunity opening to push our ideas into what had surprisingly become a massively pro-environment kind of political context. And by experimenting and acting a little bit faster than we might normally do, we found that actually we can have a massive, massive political influence without having any candidates in office. And to do that, we had to build bridges to everyone from Fridays for Future and the very grassroots of the climate movement to people in the European Commission and members of the European Parliament and people at a very senior level of politics. And we were able to do that fairly quickly. And through that, I got to work with a lot of the DSCs, and I met a lot of people across our network who were incredibly energized by the opportunity to take this idea and start exploring ways to implement it, whether locally or nationally or internationally. And one of the things I think I would love to do in the CC is to create opportunities for our grassroots across the network to set up campaigns of their own and to really take ownership over making DM's vision a reality. Because I think there's one issue that DM faces is just a lack of engagement. I was quite surprised to see that we only have 6,000 active members from about 90,000 members that are signed up. And if we want to be true to our vision of a democratic grassroots movement where ideas and policies are shaped collectively, we need to activate people so they participate in that process, because otherwise we won't be as participatory and as diverse as we might want. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks. Germinal.
Hello, can you, yeah, well, I just switched my microphone off because there were some strange noises. So I'm Germinal, I'm based in Paris. I was an active member of the European Spring Committee. Actually, I founded it with some people from GM25. I've been a member of GM25, not very active as such, because in the recent month I was working mainly with Génération. On the European Spring campaign, and I think that we should have we should try to think about what we've achieved in terms of political activism around these elections, and also try to find a way to move forward and imagine what European networks such as DM25 could be in the situation we're facing. Well, as I've just said, I'm some sort of a newbie within GM25, even though I've worked a lot with GM25 people in the recent months. But as I'm not in Génération anymore, I now want to I want to bring forward some elements regarding European campaigns on migrants, on precarity, austerity, within DM25, because I think, having worked with DM25, having been a sort of a shadow member of it, I definitely want to get that network to move on after what we've faced during the elections. That is what I would like to bring.
Great, thanks, Brice.
Yes, I think, like everyone, I would like to thank you for organizing this debate. I think it's very healthy that members organize such things spontaneously, and this is exactly what we need in DM25 at the moment and in the future. In the past month, I've been heavily involved in the climate movement, and I went to Roundabout to talk and learn from the Yellow Vests in France. And one thing that has been very inspiring is how people were able to go and implement their ideas as long as they were in line with the global idea of the movement they were involved in. And this is exactly what we need to achieve with GM25. We need to find this organic way of functioning, meaning that if a DSC has an ID and this ID stands by the principle of our program, then this DSC should be able to lead a campaign spontaneously about it. This is how we will get people to find and lead local campaign that will be relevant. There is a revolution coming, and I think it gets clearer by the month. Now, the face of this revolution is still unclear. It might be the most progressive movement we have ever seen in the history, and it might also be the most reactionary moment of human history. And at the end of next year, I wish that we are ready for the revolution to come and ready to push it for a new progressive era for mankind.
Thanks, great. And Michele?
Yes, my name is Michele Fiorillo. I'm a voice from the sideral space. And no, you cannot see my face, but that could be also an advantage. I can drink whatever I want. No, I'm joking. So I was joining DM25 since the very beginning, because I was truly believing that that movement, that kind of movement with this kind of objectives, was exactly what we needed as citizens of Europe. At least citizens that believe that the European integration project is something good and something not complete, something that is stuck in a bunch of contradictions. And I think that the name that we have, Democracy in Europe Movement, by 2025, said already everything that we need to do, no? And also to us that we are candidate for the CC is already saying what we need to do. First of all, we have to ask to ourselves, really we think that the deadline is realistic now. Personally, I don't think so. I want to be honest. But it's good to have this kind of deadline. As you remember, the deadline is for the convocation of a constituent assembly to write the European Constitution. So to democratize Europe by 2025, or at least start the democratization through an institutional process. So my candidacy is exactly to do that, I mean, coordinating the efforts of everyone, but as someone pointed out, coordinating collective is not just coordinating, is leading the movement. We have to be honest on that. And I truly agree with Brice and all the people saying that we need a stronger grassroots movement with a stronger horizontalization, but at the end, the CC will always have a leadership function. And I think this leadership function has to focus on the constituent objective of our movement, more than just elections. I'm not saying that we don't need to participate into election. I truly believe that strategy of electoral wing is something really interesting and quite revolutionary, but maybe we have now to refocus the movement on our main objective.
Okay, thank you. And thanks everyone for the first introductory session. And let's start talking about the Green New Deal. And let's start with Pawel. Pawel, you have been one of the architects of the Green New Deal for Europe. And I think you are one of the most appropriate persons to comment on what the contributions of the base of DiEM25 was on this project. And historically, movements bring change by implementing bottom-up approaches and instead of working top-down. What I am arguing here is not that the Green New Deal is top-down. What I want to say is that we need things like pan-European mobilizations in the name of DiEM25, or building strong coalitions with other environmental movements and activating members throughout Europe and the world. As an elected member of the CC, what do you plan to do to empower and coordinate members, activists, DSCs, regional or thematic DSCs, and to push and implement the Green New Deal further and move it to the next level?
Thank you for that. I think it's a two-part question, really. One is about the democratic legitimacy of the Green New Deal for Europe movement and campaign, which is something that we can't escape because a lot of questions have been asked about it. And the other is about how we actually take the Green New Deal from concept to fact, to something that's actually implemented. On the first point, back from December last year, I was involved in drafting the ecological transition policy paper for the Progressive Agenda. And we had, for the very first green paper, about 46 submissions from activists in predominantly a few countries around Europe from DiEM Network. Then we wrote a first paper, which I joined after that process. But for the second paper, we sent it out again. And we didn't really get many more responses than we did the first time. I think we got fewer, actually, than we did. And it was incredibly difficult to formulate a policy that's democratic and bottom-up without active participation from many more people representing a much more diverse range of views. So what we did on the Green New Deal for Europe campaign, which was going to be the plan on the ecological transition green paper, is we took those ideas that had been generated from the grassroots, and we said, right, let's now take them out into the world and see if when we truly open them up to as broad a constituency as possible, what others will help us make of them. And so we went to everyone from labor unions to grassroots activists, to think tanks, to scientists around Europe to really help shape those ideas and evolve them. But the roots are very much within the movement, but within the democratic confines the movement was facing at the time. And I think going to the second question now, a key part in making sure in the future that we can be truly democratic, we can involve all of our grassroots, is by just putting in the hard work to activate all the DSCs, to make sure they have a much broader active member base, to expand our membership on the whole. I think it seems now, based on what I've heard, that there are fewer active members now than there were before the European elections. Clearly something isn't going right in terms of creating the structures for people to get involved in this. In terms of what we can do specifically to mobilize the DSCs around the Green New Deal, I think one of the things that DM hasn't done so well historically is connect our vision for the future of Europe with everyday people who are going to be affected by that vision. And I think a very simple thing that we could do across the grassroots, and this is something that Brice and I have been discussing already, is to mobilize all the DSCs to go knock on doors, speak to communities, explain to them what a Green New Deal for Europe is, explain to them that it's viable and can be implemented tomorrow if there was the political will. Not ask them to sign up to any political party, not ask them to donate money to anything, but just to raise awareness of the possibility of change. And I think conversations matter so much in changing the political narrative, and we need to be at the heart of starting those conversations. And I think if we mobilize the grassroots to do that, then we can really change the narrative, the political narrative in Europe, especially in this moment when the climate has come front and center in the political discussion. So of course, that's the strategy for mobilizing the grassroots. But on the other hand, we have an incredible opportunity now that Ursula von der Leyen is committing to a Green Deal for Europe. And I know from various other DM members that within the European Commission, there are people who are trying to push for more radical proposals than she is. There's an incredible opportunity for us to shape that, which is what the campaign is also trying to do by taking these ideas, repackaging them, the ideas that DM has been coming up with for better part of a year now, repackaging them and trying to push them onto the desks of politicians and officials around Europe. So yeah, I think, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great plan. I personally like it very much, but I will refrain from saying personal opinions now. Brice, let's come to you. And in your video for the CC candidacy, you mentioned 4 goals, and one of them is to push the Green New Deal in assemblies in cities, countries, and throughout Europe. And as Pawel said, to create a bottom-up initiative across countries and across political spectrum. What would be your role in the CC to organize such an effort, and what will you do specifically? And given that so far movements are usually restricted within the borders of one country, what will it take, and what will you do to get all people together, particularly activists and movements outside of DiEM25, and form coalitions on this front? I think you're muted.
Yes, indeed. I didn't want to. The first thing that I will do, and I've started doing already, is going on the road. It's as simple as that. Meeting people, connecting groups across the borders. A friend of mine had a very relevant formula for what we need to do now. He said that we need to re-implement democracy of the human contact. We need this. We need to have democratic conversation spaces in which local groups can talk on a regular basis. This is what I will set myself to do in the weeks and months to come, because nothing will ever replace a direct phone conversation or a direct face-to-face conversation. We need to put in this effort. If we don't do it, we can't expect to go further than former wannabe transnational parties tried to achieve, like the European Party of the Left or the European Socialist Party. We must put in the human efforts and the face-to-face efforts. Regarding what we can do on a day-to-day basis, this is something that we already do with the GND campaign, having very regular meetings via Zoom across borders to organize a campaign. But what we can do to also breach another border, which is the GEM25 border, is to carry on acting outside of the GEM25 movement. The Green New Deal campaign, and we had long discussions with Pawel about it in the beginning of the campaign, can only succeed if we are ready to take it out of GEM25. At the moment, for example, in Luxembourg, I'd say in the last Green New Deal meeting that we had, only 2 people out of 9 were members of GEM25. So we have to offer a campaign and a movement, a Green New Deal movement, that does not belong to GEM25. And it's very counterintuitive with the classical political mindset that we've had in mind, meaning that Green New Deal is ours and we need to keep it for ourselves. We need to be able to go beyond that. We need to be able to implement in real life this open source mentality that we have in our program.
Okay. Yeah, great. Germinal, same question to you. And specifically, since you talk in your video that the Green New Deal is the only realistic way forward in today's global emergency situation. In that video, you also state that we need a new internationalist left, which should confront precarity and austerity, and the growing issues of climate change and climate catastrophe ahead. Now, on this context of the internationalist left, given that the Progressive International, the PI, is not as live as it was expected to be, what will you do to re-energize what we have been talking, and to re-energize the whole international movement and bring together even more climate activists worldwide?
Oh, sorry, I was... Oh. Can you hear me now? Yes. Right, good. As a member of the European Spring, I took part in the translation of our program during the electoral campaign, mainly on the workers chapter. And well, the first thing that I want to say is that I still think that it is a very good program. I still think that it is a very good European program, and that it contains a lot of links, a lot of connections between clear, simple elements regarding climate change, regarding the way we live, regarding the way the youngsters, the women, the migrants live within Europe and in a lot of other countries on the planet. I would add to what has just been said, that I kind of totally agree with, that we could definitely focus on campaigns that would not be I don't know, competing against one another, but that would be parallel campaigns that could, yeah, definitely be on specific items of climate change, specific items of precarity, specific items of democracy and freedom of movement, for instance. They all connect. Well, that's what our program means, and I think that that is what we all stand for. And I think that the purpose of these campaigns, disconnected from local, national electoral campaigns, I would say, the purpose of these campaigns would definitely be to connect almost, now I'm not going to say artificially, but quite voluntarily connect people beyond borders on the same items, on the same elements, and that's, yeah, that definitely, this is what I would put forward if I were a member of the CEC, how to connect campaigns, long-term campaigns, on these issues that are all in our program and that all make sense through the Green New Deal. And yes, I will totally back what has just been said about the fact that these things, we shouldn't see them as things that belong to us. We have to be one of the elements, one of the structures, the superstructures, the European superstructures, whatever our real numbers are. We should be the connectors, and well, that would really mean something. I mean, I think DiEM25 would definitely mean something if it were to become one of these massive connectors.
Great, thanks. Thank you very much. Great point. Michele, are you with us?
Yes, I was trying again to solve the technical problem, but it's still there. Okay.
Connections, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so the question for you is, Germinal kind of touched this with migration. One thing that climate change is bringing is the emergence of a new group of people, can I say that, which are climate refugees. And fighting climate change and all Green New Deals should also have a component of addressing the refugee crisis from that's emerging due to climate change. Now, that means that we need to combine the two, and we need to combine these two crises. People are forced to leave their homes for climate reasons, and what will you do as a member of the CC? And first of all, do you think that the Green New Deal should be expanded towards this direction? And what will you do for the Green New Deal to be more inclusive and yeah, to be more inclusive for this?
But I think, okay, we have here Pawel, but I think also we are going in this direction with the Green New Deal campaign. Of course, migration will increase, and probably, I'm from Italy, who knows, also Sicily, at some point, I hope no, but it's very near to Africa. And so desertification, also many scientists are saying that desertification is coming in Sicily, in South Italy. Actually, it's still there in some part of Sicily. So it's something that is regarding even Europe in itself, and of course regarding our brothers of our neighboring continents, and not only neighboring. So what we can do as DiEM25, as far as we are not leading European institutions or even global institutions, because as we know, we are very ambitious and we want to build up a progressive international to democratize also international institutions and have an international Green New Deal. What we can do probably is to at least involve those people they are affected by the climate change and by our choice, our day-by-day choice as citizens of Occidental world, and the bad choices of the governments until now. I was talking with my mother 2 days ago, and she was saying to me, because I was talking about DiEM25, and she was saying, what is this CC? Why you want to be candidate there? I told her, well, just to lose a little bit more of my time. I say, no, Mom, you know, we are trying to build up also this Progressive International together with Bernie Sanders. Oh, cool, she said. And with Bernie Sanders, oh, cool, she said. But we have to involve also the south of the world. And so, yes, we have to involve, first of all, them in conversation. As we call with the manifesto of Progressive International, we need a grassroots movement for global justice, for climate justice also, we can add. So we need to involve NGOs, political organizations, but also single citizens of those countries. And in the conversation and in the building up of this international Green New Deal, I think. I think also Pawel and all of you can agree on that. Second, we need maybe to do also not just papers or campaign, which is good, but also symbolical concrete actions. For instance, there was someone of the previous Italian NC, actually from electoral wing coordination in Italy, Giampiero Biso, maybe someone of you know him, he was proposing to the CC a campaign on Libya with the idea to go there and to also with some MP, with some NGO responsible, and not caring too much about our Interior Minister Salvini, go there, observe the situation, and gather people and organize sort of assemblies and rallies. Also, investing our own body at our own risk to do that. So are we ready to do it, to be on the, to go there with the Progressive International in June 25 with Bernie Sanders, Ocasio-Cortez, and show that we are all brothers of the same world? I am in, I think also you, and we should, as CC, maybe think about this kind of concrete actions. Also maybe be in the boats with these NGOs, no? Not only Richard Gere now is in Italy with on the, don't remember which of the board, which boat, which organization, but we should be there. Actually, Yanis should be there, Brian Eno should be there, Pamela Anderson should be there, Zreccio, we should be there.
Okay, good to know. Thanks. Now, Costanza, to bring another perspective into this discussion, we've been talking about activating members and engaging them and implementing an even more bottom-up approach. But one of the discussions we had with David Harvey in one of our events, he said that we have the means technologically, and we know what we should do. And the question is why we're not doing this. And his response was that, and his estimation was that the battle lies in the fight against an elite capitalist class and an oligarchy that is perverting the capacities that we have into something that is advantageous only to themselves. And I'm quoting from him. Do you think that the Green New Deal campaigns lack such an aspect of class struggle? And do you think that we should include this? And what, if yes, what will you do towards this direction? Costanza, you're muted.
Thanks, Germinal, for... Yes, so I was saying, Aris, thank you. This is a great question. We had a couple of months ago a debate with David Harvey and others, also Brice was on it. And yes, he was saying this. So what we have discussed about the Green New Deal, we discuss a lot about the green part of the Green New Deal, which of course is very important, but I think it's important also to discuss the New Deal part of the Green New Deal, which means that the climate part is important. Yes, how Germinal was saying a little bit before, it's important, but it's only important if it's connected with a more general review of like the whole system of production, and the whole, you know, the workers' conditions, both in developed countries, non-developed countries, in the South, as Michele was saying, but also in Europe and in the United States, etc. So I think the two things definitely go together. I think that the Green New Deal will mean different things a little bit in Europe and in the United States and in other countries. And so it's important to have, for DiEM, inside of DiEM, it's important to have the DSCs work at local level and, as Michele was saying, involve people who are more affected by it, so that we can develop solutions that make sense for them. But then at the same time, we have to have, so what I would like to do if I was elected in the CC would be to have a more clear streamline of ideas from the DSCs to the NCs and to the CCs. And we could do this in different ways. For example, we could do this with regular calls, like we have been doing with the DSC New York. We could be doing this, having like moments, specific times for the DSCs to present proposals, and in many other ways. But the important thing is that I think it's true that the CC will have a leading position, but it's also important that the leading position comes from opinions that are from the grassroots. So I think the most important part is to streamline what comes from the grassroots and then develop it into a proposal that works in general. So we'll have a general idea that will be then implemented in different ways at local level, if that makes sense.
Okay, and let me ask specifically for the Green New Deal, what would you want to see?
So for the Green New Deal, as I was saying, so the Green New Deal historically, at the very beginning, it was not so much, it did not even include so much a part on climate. It started really as a New Deal idea. And I think we need to take this part as one of the core centers. So the workers' conditions in many of the both developed countries and non-developed countries, if you want to keep this distinction, which is a little strange, but just let's say global south, which also I don't agree so much as a definition, but so what is important is to see what the workers' conditions are. Now, it depends on the country. One thing is to discuss in the United States, where the Green New Deal discussion, it's more advanced on certain sides because it's more equal all around the country in a sense. And then it's different to discuss in the European context, in which different countries will have different conditions. So what we could do, and I think we should do, would be to start from specific battles, and then from those battles, find alliances and forge alliances. So in other words, rather than forge alliances with other groups basing on old political ideas, old political flags, we should start a campaign and then see what we can find in those on those campaigns, what alliances we can find on those campaigns. In other words, it's not enough to just go from coal and non-renewable energies to renewable energies. We need to think about changing the means, changing the way the production works, because otherwise we're just greenwashing a system that has produced inequalities for decades, and so it's not enough.
Okay, great. Brice, did you raise your hand? You want to?
No, I was just signifying how I agreed with several points that had been raised. Specifically, the most important one, the first one, was the one made by Michele. We must be able, as GEM25, to go into direct and non-violent actions. It is very important. A revolution is looming, and if we do not, as GEM25, learn to use revolutionary tools such as non-violent civil disobedience, for example, we won't have enough power to reach out to the people who actually need the ideas that we defend. And so we must be ready to be molested by policemen like the DSC Lille did, for example, when protecting a refugee place, and we must not be afraid to go directly and organize protest in the street, as Michele suggested. And I also wanted to agree on what Costanza said. We need to claim that and proclaim that we want to exit capitalism, and say how we want to do this. That's all I wanted to say.
Great. Pawel, let me turn to you. And there have been many points in this discussion about the Green New Deal. I think you're the most appropriate person here to ask if you agree or disagree, and what we should do more based on the discussion.
Just generally with what's been said already, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So, well, I have to agree with a lot of what Costanza said. First of all, you raised the question about whether the Green New Deal can really be seen as a reassertion of a class identity or a class consciousness. And I think absolutely it does, because the Green New Deal is a very interesting place in which the science meets our policy vision, DM's policy vision. Because the science says, whether you look at the IPCC report or the Paris Agreement in 2016, it says that to solve this crisis, you need to reduce inequalities, you need to create more participatory structures for grassroots decision-making. And to do that, you need to undermine those systems of neoliberal exploitation and dispossession that are causing inequalities and causing political disenfranchisement in the first place. So we've got the science on our side. I also agree with what Costanza said about the challenges of implementing a Green New Deal in Europe specifically, because we can't go to every European country and make the point that this is a glorious mobilization on the scale of the Second World War. I mean, imagine saying that in Germany or some other country that didn't fall on the right side of the fence in that conflict. The metaphors that the Americans are using aren't going to work here, which is precisely why we need to assert this as a class movement, right? In every country, you have people who are struggling with declining wages, with growing inequalities, with increasing prices for utilities, with more dramatic extreme weather patterns to which Europeans are vulnerable because we don't have proper insulation in many homes. Many people can't even afford to heat their homes. 1 out of 10 in Europe can't afford to heat their homes. So I think it's a great opportunity to unite a lot of those discontents from around the continent, whether it's in Greece due to austerity or in Poland due to the misallocation of cohesion funds, behind this vision that can lift everyone up with it. So it's got to be a class-based vision. I disagree with Costanza. The original Green New Deal wasn't that green. I mean, when it was put forward by the New Economics Foundation, who were working with on the Green New Deal campaign back in 2008, about half of the policies had to do with phasing out fossil fuels, taxing fossil fuel use very aggressively, implementing structural reforms to the financial system to take away its capacity to lend to these kinds of industries, massively expanding the role of public finance, just as we've been proposing for the past 2 years. So these ideas have been around for a very long time. And I think this also touches on a point that a couple of people have made about our place within this Green New Deal movement. We're very much part of a lineage. We're very much inheritors of ideas that have been formed by many different people before us, and that are now being advanced by us, both here and in the United States. And I think especially as we move towards a kind of progressive international, where we try and develop international solutions to common problems, we need to recognize ourselves as a part of a very big puzzle that's being shaped around the world simultaneously. And I think only by doing that can we build those kinds of alliances that will help us push this to the global stage.
Great points. Germinal, let me turn to you. You've been involved in the European Spring, and Pawel just said that we have the science on our side, and this is very clear. But there is a debate on whether science issue actually resonates to voters. Do you think that we just need to keep developing the Green New Deal, or do you think that we need to do even much more to convince voters, people, and movements from an elections perspective?
On this specific matter, I have a maybe it's a very personal position. I'm going to test this in this debate and further on in this election. I think that we should not focus first on electors, on voters, and that we should definitely have I don't know, let's say a progressive. A logically progressive approach. And I think that if you compare, well, in France, for example, if you compare the way youngsters take to the streets in the climate marches and the audience that our program had in the election and the audience that the left, other parties in the left had in that election, we have a slight problem. I think we should first focus on those who have already started to move on different fronts, like the Deliveroo guys who fight on national and international levels, for example, youngsters that are involved in climate marches. I think that we should try first to convince the first people that actually are listening to the different messages on these matters. And I think that we have one thing to convey, one thing to get them to possibly envisage is that, yes, we have science on our side, and yes, we have science saying that capitalism has become a suicidal and senile force. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I think that we should, and that's connected to something that is maybe less political in a sense, but that is more technical. I think that the idea of campaigning, the idea of working in unitary campaigns with other people that are not GM25, that are not people that we are involved in national parties with, I think that this is the way we can get to talk to many more people, and then possibly envisage alliances and the electoral, national or local or level. But I think that we should first consider things very broadly and focus on real campaigns that really appear in the streets, in the papers, rather than on electoral campaigns. That's the way we're going to get that message heard, I think.
Okay, and let me ask you a bit more on this. Do you think that an anti-capitalistic perspective is the way to go forward, or a way to go forward?
I would say that well, to cut a long story short, I think that our program, the program we worked with on during the electoral campaign, was clearly, it was a very radical, but it says a lot about the times. That was a very radical reformist program, but just some elements of it, some very simple things like democracy within the workspace regarding production and the possibility for workers and people involved in the life of companies to have a say. It's now become anti-capitalistic in these times. So I would, very often I ask myself the question. I come from the anti-capitalist, I don't really like that word, but I come from the Marxist left, from the radical left. I don't see the point now. If I consider the program I've been defending, I defended during the electoral campaign, I don't see the point. I mean, I think that it is a program that in itself has got radical reformist answers for now, and that opens possibilities for, a political revolution that Brice is talking about. So I don't think that we have, specifically on that, I don't think that we have to put a label on it. Well, a lot of people will see it as anti-capitalist, fair enough. It is just the thing to do in the situation, and it contains, radical social change within the way we produce things, and the way we organize life on the planet. So if this is getting rid of capitalism, yes, it means something then.
Okay, Brice, what's your take on this, and how do we marry the two, like an anti-capitalistic movement, the theory of the science with what we actually campaign for at the grassroots level.
I'm afraid, because I already answered to things that Costanza and Pawel said, and Michele as well. I'm afraid I already spoke a lot.
No, you're good. I keep track of time, so we're good.
Okay. Well, I think it's also a matter to us to redefine a ideological framework. Reigniting a class struggle means reinventing a word or a concept that will fit the class struggle as we see it today. For example, a lot has been going on about the word precaria instead of proletaria. And I think we really have to dive into this. What does the precaria mean today? Can we have better identification to a social class called the precaria rather than the proletariat? And according to what I could, what echoes I could have from the Yellow Vest movement, I think such words really start to have a proud definition in the working class. People know that they are precarious, and they start to be proud of this. Yes, we are precarious. Yes, we work 2 jobs. Yes, we are losing our rights for a decent social benefit, for a decent retirement benefit, even for some political rights. But we keep on fighting. This is an ideological and philosophical work, and I think we need to address it. For example, maybe we should, as GM25, say that we fight for the right of the precaria. Simple sentence in our status. It's just an idea. Beyond that, we need to connect with what the people need on the ground. We had a dreadful heat wave, 2 dreadful heat waves in Europe. We had little islands of heat in big cities. Well, in these little islands of heat, I can tell you that you don't need science for people to tell you what they need. I was in Strasbourg last month, and people were absolutely, we were campaigning with a comrade of GM25 in Strasbourg, and people were absolutely able to tell us what they needed. They needed more trees. They needed more fountains. They needed public fountains with water that they could drink, drinkable water. This is where we have to start. We had massive wildfires in Luxembourg last month. Well, go and ask the farmers over there. They will need funds to replant new fields and new bushes to stop fires. We had a tornado in Luxembourg 2 days ago. Go in the neighborhoods that were hit by the tornado. People will need stronger houses to protect themselves from such events. Go in the street, talk to people, ask them what they need. The DSC Lille had an amazing strategy that they told us at a mini academy in Luxembourg. They were touring the ring, the highway ring around Lille, and they were asking people living in the buildings around the ring, do you suffer from air pollution? And obviously people answered, yes, we do. One family had chronic asthma problem. One other family had a child who ended up in coma because of asthma problems. This is what we are facing, and this is what we need to find out in the people around us. And by collecting these witnesses and all these little tales, we can start organizing people's assemblies in neighborhoods. We can start organizing people's assemblies in cities and say, we have a problem in this city. We have a problem in this neighborhood. we need more bus lines to stop using our cars because it makes the heat higher and more difficult to endure in summer. Return to the people. Let them help them organize and connect with other neighborhoods and other cities. This is what we can do. This is what we have to do.
Okay, that's a great response. Michele, what are your thoughts? And let me, before we hear to Michele, let me remind all the viewers, they can ask questions on the chat, and we will have as many candidates as possible respond to them. So, Michele.
Yes, I would like also to remind the viewers that I'm not hiding myself. It's just a technical problem, and we don't know what it is. But by the way, I want to thank Aris and Vincenzo and also Costanza, all the people of DSC New York want to give us this opportunity of true democracy, in the sense of deliberative democracy, the possibility to have a dialogue and confrontation of idea for the common good. In that case, the common good of DiEM25, which is the common good of Europe and maybe of the world, to be ambitious. So are you asking about my thoughts about capitalism?
Yeah, Brice made a very good point on like that we need to connect to the people and hear the people's need.
Mm-hmm.
So what will you do as member of the CC to further empower DSCs to do that and to actually inspire them to do even more?
Okay. What we need is to go out of the movement, basically, to spread our ideas. We didn't have so much time during the electoral campaign to spread the great ideas of European Spring. European Spring at the end is DiEM25 plus some friend party. This is another type of debate that we have to do with this, how we still want to be connected with this party or the people of these parties. But apart that, we have to connect with especially common citizens. Brice and not only Brice was talking about the workers, with NGOs, with environmental activists, with feminists. For instance, in Italy, but not only, they are struggling hard against Salvini. So I think our DSC has to focus in the spreading of the Green New Deal ideas and to be the possible platform to interconnect the different platform of struggle of our European society. Feminist movement and feminist theorists are talking about intersectionality. I think as DiEM25 and with all DSCs as the real center of our movement, so it's a sort of decentered movement with this coordinating this multiple headed movement all over Europe. The DSCs and the movement as a whole have to be the platform of this possible intersectionality, right? And I think is only by joining all these different struggles, only to being at the disposal of the others, rather that to have the will to be the winners or to hegemonize the other, that we can create the democratic platform that will lead us towards the Constituent Assembly. So Brice loved to talk about people assemblies. I prefer the term citizen assemblies, but is more or less the same. Let's call them the citizen and people assemblies, in the sense that the term also citizens in the roots is connected with the idea of the city as the place of the democratic dialogue and democratic power. But in reality, our society is complex, are not only the cities, we have also the countryside, dispersed people that are not just only in the city, and we need also to connect with them. But we have to be aware that we'll be not alone that will do all this. So in a way, we can, to end, we can be hegemonic without the will to hegemonize the others. could sound as a paradox, but I think this could be the secret of our action. Being generous, basically.
Great. Germinal, coming to you, your thoughts. And
Yep.
we have, Rosita asks if the Green New Deal contains too many elements. Would it be better to communicate a couple of elements at a time instead of all together?
I think that if we consider the idea of long-term campaigning on different aspects of our program of the Green New Deal, I think it is possible to well, elaborate together sorts of modules that we could work on. For example, for 6 months we focus on this, and then the next 6 months we focus on that, etc. Yes, the matters we have to address are very complex. I have to admit that sometimes I discover new things every day regarding new aspects of well, the destruction of the planet and the complexity of the elements we're trying to use collectively as the humankind to face these things. We constantly have new obstacles, new challenges, and yes, all these elements are very technical, but in the past, I mean, there were campaigns, I don't know, but campaigns for peace, campaigns on nuclear weapons, campaigns on different elements in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and so on, where people activists had to appropriate very, very complex elements and explain them to the population, and they found ways to explain these things. It is not impossible to actually work. It's actually, you know, I think it is actually something that would be excellent for everyone to collectively work on gaining more and more intelligence and willpower over these matters. So yeah, there are different ways to actually, especially through debating, conferences, you know, free street debates, etc. There are a lot of ways to actually spread things, elaborate collectively, and that's also a way. That's a way a campaign grows, and that's also a way a group within a campaign also grows, I think.
Great. Costanza, let me come back to the thing. To the discussion about climate refugees. Do you see climate refugees in Europe being them able to campaign for Green New Deals, and whether they can be activated for pushing for political change? They are by definition a very vulnerable group, but also the group that has experienced and lived through the climate catastrophe. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, so as some of you know, I worked at the UN for a few years, and lately also on the Security Council. I think climate refugees are a very important category of people, and that need to be taken seriously from a political point of view. And this is not yet so much part of the discussion. It is part of our internal discussion, but I think there are a few issues that I see in this regard. First of all, I think we are failing in the communication part, which is important, because the communication on immigrants, on refugees, especially in Europe, is completely dominated by the right. I'm thinking of Italy, of course, where it's especially the case, but it is the case also in many other countries. And so, first of all, we need to change the narrative, change the conversation, change the idea that the migrant crisis is a crisis, that the refugees crisis is a crisis, is not a crisis in the sense that it's a one-off. It's a crisis in the sense that there has been a spike, but it's something that is here to stay, and so we need to take care of it in a perspective that looks at decades. This said, climate refugees should have their own specific category, not because economic refugees should not be, economic migrants in some cases should absolutely be considered as refugees, but this is a different thing. But climate refugees should be considered as their own category, and so have specific policies directed to them once they reach Europe. Now, on your question whether they can be involved in political activism, they can for sure be involved in political activism, but this can only happen after they have policies in place to greet them and to make them part of the society. Because what is happening right now in Europe and in Europe is that the different countries have completely different reaction on refugees, welcoming immigrants, legislation, and this does not make sense. Of course, we have to have one complex and unique response and coordinated response between the countries. And then once we have that, we need to make sure that the people who come, especially once we're talking about refugees, because when we're talking about migrants, we can talk about specific visas and work visas and to strengthen the legal access, which is not strengthened. And that's why people are forced to take boats and everything that we know. But in regards to refugees, and especially climate refugees, which are not considered as such as of now, we need to have humanitarian corridors for them to come. We need to imagine that they will be coming, and they will be coming in larger and larger numbers. And so we need to think about how to get them good jobs, how to get them a good welcoming on the countries, how to make sure that they're taken care of. And then once we have this in place, then for sure they can be a good ally.
Okay, it's a great point. And Pawel, the last question regarding the Green New Deal to you before we move on to the next subject. We've talked about a lot of things, more theoretical and also many more practical. Now, as a member of DiEM25, what do you think, and as a potential member of the CC of DiEM25, how can the CC better communicate the goals of the Green New Deal? And what can the CC do to specifically to inspire more action?
So 2 questions. How can the CC better communicate the goals of the Green New Deal? I assume that's directed at the DiEM grassroots. So the DSCs and the various volunteers who will be fighting to make it a reality. Or do you mean externally to people outside of DiEM, or both? Because I think it's...
What's your take on it?
Well, I mean, there are 2 strands of it, right? Of course, on one hand, you need to make sure that the entire grassroots is activated in the pursuance of this goal. And on the Green New Deal for Europe campaign, we've had some conversations, for example, with the Sunrise Movement in the States, who is responsible for pushing the Green New Deal there onto the national agenda. And one of the things we learned from them, which I think we haven't done as well, is that they are incredibly good at equipping their activists and their grassroots volunteers with the right lexicon to speak competently and coherently about the Green New Deal, for example, in TV appearances, in front of journalists, and with their friends and families, so that they can make this idea spread more widely. And there are great examples of random people being stopped by Fox News in, I don't know, some small town in Texas, all of a sudden going on a kind of economic breakdown of what the Green New Deal is and how it can work. And I think the CC internally within DiEM has to play a very big role in making sure that activists across the network have the right lexicon, have the right words to talk about our program. Because through actively involving them in shaping the policy, through actively involving them in communicating the policy, by, for example, organizing communications trainings and seminars, as we've been doing on the campaign, where you bring a bunch of DSCs into a Zoom, you do a kind of question and answer session where you test people's knowledge, give them access to various kinds of policy documents, and you're available to answer any questions. You prepare activist packs, which have talking points and top lines that people can read through, can memorize, can learn, you know, 1-line, 2-line responses to things. This is how movements are built. This is how credibility is formed. So you put together a coherent package of documents. You have a coherent training strategy in place where any volunteer who wants to learn about the program can. And you have a winning formula. The next step is then to activate the grassroots to take those ideas to the right places. So the first question, part of the question was, how do we communicate it internally? How do we communicate it externally? I think the answer to that is linked to the answer to the first question, which is by making sure that everyone across the DM network, in any communication they have with outside people, whether it's a member of a national parliament, a member of the European Parliament, or an activist from another grassroots movement, they should be able to represent our ideas faithfully and coherently, you know, without accusations that they're diluting them, that they're too capitalist, that they're not, you know, they're too radical, whatever. So just giving people the right training. Another way to do that is just to make sure we're always in the press. And this is something we've been trying to do on the campaign. We've been in all the major English language publications, from The Guardian to Jacobin, Tribune, The New Statesman, lots of other things. Building links with editors, publishing things, making sure we're being talked about. And then, as a few others have said already, building out links with other organizations, other movements, even other political parties that are focusing on the same kinds of ideas, and making sure that we're on the same page about things, right? Because alone, we're only as powerful as our grassroots network, and we can do a lot to activate that and strengthen it. But by going outside of that network and building kind of solidarity and building bridges with other movements, other thinkers, other, you know, politicians, and so on, especially when it comes to the grassroots and labor unions and people that DM hasn't traditionally been so good at communicating with, then our ideas will make it out into the world, and our ideas will win backing, and our ideas will acquire the kind of political firepower that's needed to push them through when it finally comes to the vote in the parliament, or when policymakers finally start putting pen to paper and developing these ideas. Does that answer the question? There was a third part, wasn't there?
It does much more than answering the question, and it gives me paves the way for our next big topic in our discussion, which is the inner workings, the internal structure of DM25, and what we can do to not only improve it, but and make it more functional, but also to activate even more members. You said that you just said that the internal communications of DM25 are not working perfectly. Is that what I understood from your response?
No.
No.
Sorry, go
on. I think you said something. I'll go back to the video in a sec. But many people argue that the internal communications within DM25 suffer and are a bit dysfunctional. What's your take on this? And in order to do all the things you said regarding the Green New Deal, do we need to improve DM25 internal communications?
So I think I agree with the sentiment, but I think it's distinct from the point I was making. The point I was making is that there are tools you can deploy to mobilize your network, to make sure that they are, you know, able to really become advocates and ambassadors for your program, which aren't only about communicating. You can be an effective communicator, but still not have the toolkit necessary to empower your grassroots. And I think we definitely don't yet have the toolkit. And in terms of communication, I think we do a good job in some areas and not quite as good job in others. And I think a couple of examples of where we don't do a very good job is the growing split within the movement between people who think we should stay as a kind of democratic grassroots movement that's not involved in politics, and people who think that we should expand our electoral activities. And the people who seem to be confused by the fact that, for example, Mera 25 was set up fairly quickly and not everyone within the network knew about it. Now, that's clearly a communication issue. Of course, as a movement, we have to accept that there are some political opportunities that need to be taken, and they need to be acted on quickly. And sometimes acting on something quickly means that you can't have a full member consultation, because I was involved in one of these and I know that take months and months and months to complete. But at the same time, you have to have a framework in place that ensures that no one is left behind, because as a democratic grassroots movement, you can't have democracy in some places and no democracy in other places. And you can't have people who feel like they're left out of critical decision-making. So I think there's a lot that can be done in terms of strengthening the kind of top-down and bottom-up communication. I think part of it will have to do with just having better links between the CC and the NCs, to making sure there's some kind of open channel of communication, maybe some kind of regular contact between the CC and the NCs, that's specifically held with a view to then sending information further down the network. So the DSCs should have the same structures as the NCs, and so on, just to make sure that all decision points are linked up, and that there are frameworks for making decisions and ensure that no one's left out. And I think the CC will have a lot of work to do in terms of coming up with those frameworks. I don't pretend to have the answers, and I shouldn't have the answers. I think this is something that a lot more people have to be involved in shaping, especially those people who feel now that they're being left out. So we have to go out to them, speak to them, ask them what their concerns are, and then work together to address them.
Great. Germinal, let me come to you. And Pawel started this with the interesting point on the internal split, whether DiEM25, on the role of electoral wings within DiEM25. Having worked for the European Spring, what do you think DiEM25 position should be regarding electoral wings, parties within the movement, and what can be done to further improve the communications of electoral wings and the movement as a whole?
Well, in the 25 questions that were asked to possible candidates or now candidates for the CC, there were questions. There were specific questions about this point, and one of the questions, if I do remember, was, do you think that the DiEM25 as a whole should have a form of control on the activities of all the electoral wings? And I was very tempted to answer yes. I think that there is something that is at stake here in terms of building a European network. It's not that I have doubts about what the electoral wings are doing, were doing, the reasons why they were created. It was obviously because of major opportunities, as Pawel's just said. And I guess, well, I haven't seen everything, but I guess that, yes, some people had, some people started to cringe on certain aspects, etc. I definitely think that if there is a split, it should not split us completely. If there is a split between those, and I might be one of them, that think that we must focus on long-term, non-electoral campaigns, and those who think that we should definitely run right now in where it is possible, where it is feasible, in electoral campaigns, local electoral campaigns. Well, this should not separate people. I don't think that for the moment we are big enough, strong enough to actually, divide on such elements. I totally think that it is possible that this matter is possible to address as long as everyone works on, well, I'd say works on the two levels, as long as everyone considers the fact that where it is necessary, where it has been decided, there is electoral work. And if those who actually, well, if also other people, well, everyone works on the long-term campaigns, I still definitely, I mean, if I just had to say something, I still do think that right now, right after the failure of the electorals, the European Spring, we have to have a large debate on what DiEM25 is about, And again, I would say, I think that the European, transnational, international aspect of what we do, continental, let's say continental to start with, the continental aspect of what we do in terms of coordination, in terms of elaboration and taking decisions at a continental level, within or without, inside or outside of the union for members in Britain, for example. I think that this matters a lot, that we are making it together. We are deciding on these things together. So, well, just one. It's a question, actually. It's a question to Pawel. Did I understand it well? Is there some idea of replication of all the elements, all the connections and all the structures between the CC, between the NCs and the DSCs? Is that what Pawel, is that what you meant? Because, well, I don't have a clear vision on that, but I would like to understand what it implies.
Do I have a brief right response?
Yeah, go ahead.
I just meant of having more effective bilateral communication structures or multilateral communication structures, making sure that decisions that the CC make or decisions that the CC is contemplating somehow trickle down to the DSCs, somehow trickle down to the rest of the network, so that people aren't taken by surprise when those decisions are made. So I think there have to be two things. On one hand, there has to be some kind of written down framework that gives the CC, and I know we have something like this, but I think it needs to be more accessible and more available to everyone, that gives the CC a mandate to make certain decisions when it needs to do so for reasons of political expediency, and to do them quickly and maybe to do them without full consultation. But there should also be just better connections between NCs and DSCs, so the NCs know what the DSCs are doing. So the NCs can then communicate that to the CC and vice versa. There maybe should be open panels where the CC discusses things openly with a much broader constituency of people, for example, through open Zoom calls like we're having now. And I think there's a lot of thinking to be done around reconciling, around bridging that grassroots and that coordinating function to make sure that no one's taken by surprise by any decision that's made.
I want to come back to this point, but let's hear from everybody first before we discuss more. Brice, in your video, you call for, one of your goals is to create an assembly of assemblies of NCs. And you describe several steps to create a more democratic space. What will you do? How will you do this specifically? And this is a big coordination task. So it's very easy that DSCs will be left behind. How will you make sure that all that we have been discussing so far will involve all DSCs and that all DSCs feel included?
Well, I think it's tremendously important, I said that in my opening statement, that we stay up to date with what the most radical movements ask. And the most radical movements at the moment have way more radical internal democracy than we do. It's very important that we know this. If we are behind society, we have no relevance. And for the moment, we are behind the most radical social movements. Now, that being said, when we started GEM25, and to me, I started GEM25 1.5 years ago, we had monthly or bi-monthly DSC meetings online. This is what we need. We need to connect with DSCs and tell them every month we will have a DSC Zoom call to talk about current campaigns, to talk about proposed campaigns, to talk about everything. This is politics. This is our agora. This is our forum. If we have it only online and written, it's all well and good, but then again, nothing replaces a direct discussion. We need people to speak to each other. We need voices, we need faces. That's how we can connect. We need human connection. I also think that these assembly of assembly could be able to propose campaigns. For example, my co-coordinator at the moment is working on building a housing campaign. So she connected with all the DSCs she could, and now she's gathered them in a sub-discussion about this specific campaign. And this could end up being an official DiEM25 campaign. If the campaign picks up pace and attention and it works, then it can become an official DiEM25 campaign. And this is also something I think that we have to implement, which is not top down, not from the CC to the DSCs, but from the DSCs to the CC. We have to also give the power to DSCs and the assembly of DSCs to propose and push forward campaign that will be by definition 100% grassroots. That's I was done.
Let me ask you more on this, because this very initiative, we think DiEM25, it's considered unofficial as it is members' initiative and not coming from top down. Do you think that members' initiatives are empowered enough currently, or do you think that they need to be empowered more?
Well, that's the whole point. The assembly of assembly should be as legitimate and sovereign as the CC. Obviously, we need a CC. I think we still need a CC because we need to be able to make quick decisions whenever it is needed. And we need to be able to have spokespersons able to go on to the press, go on to the media, and give some very dedicated steering. It's okay. But we have amazing DSCs all over Europe and beyond Europe, as you demonstrate. And we need them to be able to propose policies and campaigns that will define and reshape DiEM25 in the future. So we need to push in the upcoming weeks and the upcoming month to recognize DSC's initiatives and campaigns as potential official DiEM25 campaigns. This is how we will empower our members. This is how we will empower grassroots initiatives, by demonstrating that members' initiative campaign can become official DiEM25 campaign. That it's not only the CC steering us in a certain direction and defining the strategy, that the assembly of DSCs is 100% relevant, legitimate, and sovereign to propose, formulate, and lead a strategy.
Thanks. Michele, let me turn to you. In one of the most recent coordinating collective meetings, it was said that the MERA25 model should be taken and applied to other countries, and to allow electoral wings of DiEM25 be the primary forces, runners within elections, and not so much with coalitions with other movements. What is your take on this? And do you think that electoral wing should be given priority?
It's a very harsh question, Aris. Thank you to ask this to me, but I think each candidate should answer to this question, because I think this is the core of many debates in the forum, and also at the core of a lot of wasting of energies by our members. But I take the occasion to overcome some misunderstanding. As I told at the start, I think DiEM25 is born to democratize Europe and to have this constituent assembly by 2025. Actually, I just read again the manifesto, and we are actually saying in the manifesto that by 2025, we want to have the decision of the Constituent Assembly enacted. So, meaning that the Constitution should start to work. Electoral win strategy, if you go back to the discussion about the birth of this strategy, it's about to have a movement to be effective in the public political debate and not to be just like a movement producing papers and talks and events. So this is a good reason to be in the elections, to be protagonists and share with all the society our ideas. European Spring born for that, to bring together different progressive forces. They were sharing with us the basic principle of our manifesto. And we, as DiEM25, were like the leader of this coalition, but not pretending to be alone, able to be alone to contest and win European elections. I think this is the point. At the moment, at least, we cannot pretend to be alone, the saviors of Europe. We need a leverage to change Europe. We say that the main leverage is to have this Constituent Assembly. Is if we really want this Constituent Assembly, we have to pave the way for this Constituent Assembly. We have said in some of the papers about this that to convey the Constituent Assembly, obviously, we will not wait the member states to agree on that. It's already difficult. They agree to have a convention to revise the treaties. We say that this is not the way we have to push because we already failed that with the referendum in France about the previous treaty trying to have a constitution, which in that form we know was not so good, at least for our radical kind of thing. So we have to try to build up this pan-European referendum with, we say, with an auto-convocation of this referendum, a bit like a Catalan model, but in a more successful way, bringing together mayors, president of regions, trade unions. They will organize this referendum that will have not a legal binding, but will have at least a political meaning. And obviously, to have this political meaning, we need to gather at least, I would say, 10 million of Europeans going to vote for this pan-European referendum the same day. So the question is, if we want to do this, we need more friends than enemies, right? And as far as you participate in electoral competition, you create enemies. I mean, when you are in election, unless you are in a coalition, but also in a coalition, you run to have one vote more than the others, right? So I think we have to study case by case the space, the context where it's useful to contest election in order to gain visibility and power consensus to build up consensus for our Constituent Assembly and for our Green New Deal. But where this is not possible, it's better not to contest elections. It's very simple. I do believe that in Greece was needed to run alone as DiEM25, also as for a sort of restoration of intellectual justice, at least, for what happened after the big hockey against the agenda of the Troika that was betrayed actually by Tsipras government for different reasons that we cannot accept. So it was an important choice to run in Greece to gain the consensus, at least to say we have MPs, they will in each debate in the Greek Parliament, we remember what was the point to try to overcome the agenda of the Troika. And Yanis is doing that in the last days very well. We are all sure that we will continue on that. Now, let me talk, because I think I didn't talk so much as the others. So to end on that, I think that Greece is also a very specific case. In the sense, it's true, is a case that reveals how the European institutions are working when you arrive at the core of the questions, right? And it's thanks also to Greek case that we are now here with a transnational movement to say we need to democratize Europe because we don't want any other Greek case. But we have also to be aware that the different contexts, the different national contexts are different from Greece, and will be not so easy to have the same result as in Greece. As, I mean, the result of European Spring Coalition, let's be honest, they were not so good. They were not so, yes, 1 million of people, they voted for us, for the broad coalition, European Spring, but we didn't manage to have even one MP elected. Yes, in Greece, we were there for just a few votes. But the historical fact is that Volt Europe, with a lot of money, maybe from Soros, maybe from others, they managed at least to elect one person in Germany. And in Germany, we had our leader, our second leader, Zrech Korvac. We had even the endorsement of a famous actress. I don't know if that was so helpful, actually, in the Greek context. Maybe, let's use a joke, but this is just an example how we have to study different national contexts. Maybe in Italy, that could have helped to have votes. Also, because the context is different from the Greek one. So what I'm saying, we have to stick, and just finish it, we have to stick to the electoral wing paper about how has to work electoral wings, and there is say that we have to study context by context. So in just one word, we don't need like to do like in Greece everywhere. We need to be wise everywhere. In Greek was wise to build up Mera 25 as such and contest election and elect MPs.
Okay, I will have to stop you here. Thank you.
No problem.
Costanza, let me turn to you. What we discussed with Brice before was empowerment of projects within DiEM25, of initiatives. Now, one project that was official was the Progressive International. And the New York City DSC, there was a very limited attempt to coordinate and involve the DSC and inform the only DSC on the ground regarding the Progressive International projects, future, and future trajectory. Now, whether this was an exception within DiEM25 to include DSCs or whether similar things happened elsewhere, that's up for discussion. But I'm sure that let's focus the discussion not on what happened in the past regarding the Progressive International, but what we can learn from the past for the future to solve similar cases for the future. Do you think that keeping local DSCs in the loop information is sufficient within DiEM25? And what would you do to further strengthen and motivate such DSCs to be involved in official or unofficial projects within DiEM25?
Yes, thank you, Aris. This is a question that is very close to my heart, as you know. And I think it's a very good example of why DSC's work needs to be strengthened and why the DSCs are important for the organization in general of DiEM25. So what happened with the Progressive International is that we had a lot of interest, and I keep receiving, we all keep receiving emails, questions from groups, even, from groups with a lot of good following, groups that we could have worked well together. First of all, because the Progressive International is needed. This is a great project that Diem has, I don't know, and it is extremely needed. So, of course, we all know that unfortunately it didn't go exactly as we wanted it to go from the beginning. I wouldn't say that the pool has been plugged, I don't know. But it is a good example, because in this case, of course, there have been many things happening, right, with the Progressive International, because it's an alliance, and Bernie Sanders, of course, is now focused on his presidential bid, and so this is part of it. But from the very beginning, the DSC New York offered help in connecting with local organizations, in connecting with even just activists and grassroots. For example, we had contacts from Mexico, from South America, from North America, etc. So now, why was I saying that this is a good example on the functioning of the DM as a whole? Because I think the communication needs to be two ways, right? It needs to be from the DSCs through the national collectives or directly to the CC, and also the other way around. Now, obviously, for an organization so big, it is impossible that the communication flows without any issues, right, all the time. But in cases such as this one, where one particular campaign, it's of particular interest of one specific DSC, I think it could have been more effective if the DSC was put in a condition to help support, especially because, considering the European elections and other priorities that the CC had, it was difficult for them to focus on the Progressive International as much as we could have. So I think in that case, definitely the communication didn't work. It's not just a problem of communication. There have been issues with the Progressive International per se, obviously, as I said. But at the same time, it is an important battle. I think it's a battle that it's at the very core of DM, because I think that, as I said many times, we cannot solve global issues with local solutions. We need to have alliances, and the Progressive International is both needed. It is time for it. There is requested from many parts, and so it's just a pity to let it go, when strengthening local DSCs would be the right way to make sure that all of the processes are followed.
Pawel, let me turn to you, and if you want to comment on what has been said. There is also one question from Lefteris from Facebook about transparency and the check and balances within DM25, if you want to comment on that as well.
So the question is about transparency, what, internally?
Yes, internal transparency and check and balances within the CC, its meetings, and within DM25, I would add in general.
Well, I think I partly answered that question in response to the earlier question about the communication structures between the DSC, the NC, and beyond. I think it's very important that there are clear transparency tools and communication lines that are open throughout the network. I think minutes of meetings should be available to everyone. I don't actually know if they are now, and that's also a communication issue. And I think, if they are, then many other people don't know as well. But I think there are a lot of tools we can put in place to make that happen. But I think I've already spoken to that. In terms of the previous question, I mean, I agree with a lot of what's been said by Brice, by Costanza, about the need to massively expand grassroots participation. And I think actually the Green New Deal for Europe as a campaign can be a blueprint for how that's done. Because what we did is we took this idea that was from our agenda, we took it slightly outside of DM. We went to lots of people around Europe and we talked to them about it. We went to all of the DSCs and we talked to them about it. And it's been remarkable how involved and engaged people have been, right? So the whole Porto DSC, for example, joined the campaign. They're organizing local meetings. They're building bridges to members of the European Parliament. They're talking about building bridges to local politicians because there's this very clear goal in mind, because we've created a tool for them to take ownership over DM's vision, where it's not top down, but it's bottom up. And I think it's so important not only to making sure that we use all of the effectiveness of our grassroots, and not only to making sure that people feel included in the decision-making process, but also because you don't get good ideas unless you involve lots of people, right? This is why we have democracy. You don't get good ideas if they're top-down, if they come from a small group of people. So I think empowering the grassroots is really important. I think, I mean, it becomes tricky in the context of the Progressive International, because the Progressive International is will be an umbrella organization that will be much broader in scope than DM is. It will include, hopefully, organizations from across the world. It will have to be about empowering not only our own grassroots, but also creating structures for the empowerment of other groups, and creating communication networks where we can effectively communicate both policies, and both at a level that's understandable to the average Joe, and a level that's understandable to policy officials. And we'll have to find a way to connect those to local concerns across the world to make sure that anyone can have a role in shaping it, but also can find a way to understand it very easily and understand its impact. And this is incredibly challenging. And this is something that I'm sure there's a lot of thinking happening about this behind the scenes now. But it's an impossibly challenging task, but it's one that no one else has been willing to do, so we have to do it. I think, you know, one of the reasons I'm a member of DM is that we are the most ambitious social movement, at least in Europe. We're also the most generous social movement that I've seen in terms of our willingness to share our ideas with others, and to bring others on board, and to say yes to anyone who signs up to our core values and our principles. And I think, you know, our strength is in keeping true to those ideals. So yeah, that's all for me.
Great, thank you. Brice, your thoughts, and if you were to identify one thing that that could take improvement in the internal structure of DM25, what would that be, and what will you do as a member of the CC to fix this?
I think I already answered that question. I think we should also ask. I remember a few months ago, I was at the first assembly of the local groups of the climate movement in France. And they had a very interesting way of approaching how they were going to structure themselves. It was 1 month after the 15th of March, and people, so there were already plenty of local groups all around France, and they, rather than creating a coordinating collective, they asked the representatives of the local groups. It was an assembly of the local groups, and they asked, okay, what do you need? And reorganizing our organizing principles should go around these questions. What do we need, structurally speaking, for DM25 to work better? We need a reorganization of our organizing principles. I think it's actually important, and to stick to this question, what do we need? Because some DSCs will have unexpected answers that might be incredibly helpful. And And we need to, of course, we can generate ideas as CC members, but we need to leave the rewriting of our organizing principles to the assembly of the DSCs. We shouldn't, and I think we must not take part in this. People on the ground, who are still on the ground, should be the one relevant to say what they need for GM25 to work better, be more efficient. I wanted to answer to what Costanza had to say about the Progressive International. I totally agree that this is incredibly important. Sabrina Lazar on Facebook asked what we could do to counter climate change quickly and effectively. And this is exactly what we need. We need, for example, for the Green New Deal to emerge in the United States. So what can we do? Because we have such an important election in the United States in 2020. What can we do to push that? What can we do to support that? And giving a way broader and official mandate to the DSC New York to work on the Progressive International, for example, would be a very good idea to make sure that the people on the ground, you are able to connect with members from the France Insoumise in the United States, members from Podemos in the United States, and Mera GM25 in the United States, and Labour in the United States. This is what we need to do, but we need to give a mandate to the people on the ground sometimes to execute a specific task. If you remember the Athenian democracy, you can witness that they had so many mandates. They had actually a very small administration. They had mandates given to people every year. And this is something that we should be able to do. When someone on the ground is faced with a very important situation for GM25, we should be able to give a very specific mandate for this. And that could be useful to strengthen our international, beyond European policy practice.
You're raising great points. Germinal, let me turn to you now. Many people have joined DiEM25 because of some big names that started this. And especially in the past, I've seen posts, DiEM25 has been a fan club of Yanis Varoufakis, Rako Horvat, and his company. With your experience in the, within the European Spring and Generation, do you think that this is the case to a certain extent, and what can we do to convince people that DiEM25 is not a fan club of big names, but it's actually a grassroots organization, or we work to make it a grassroots organization?
Well, again, on this matter, I think that in the word campaigning, in the word explaining, especially if you're talking about something that is quite complex, yes, you might actually drop some names along the road and talk about some people. But I think that the best way not to be or not to appear like the possible fan club of 3 or 4 or 5 big names is to actually present to others ideas, sometimes simplified as they can be simplified on a poster, but most of the time complex ideas through debates. So I think that definitely the idea of campaigning for name, not I mean for names of ideas, names of concepts like the Green New Deal. Well, if we want to avoid people's names, if we want to avoid being seen as the Varoufakis gig, well, we should be the Green New Deal gig, or other things gig. That's the way we could avoid these matters. There, I would add something on the electoral aspect of things. Well, one part of the experience of the European campaign, the European election campaign, and I would obviously say that from a French perspective, is that our ideas were, I'm not saying that they were not properly defended either by Génération or by DiEM25 within the coalition. It's definitely not what I would say, but especially in France, and that is something that happens everywhere. But especially in France, elections are about people, about the shirts they wear, their haircut, and things like that. It's something completely silly, but I think that we, as a European federation movement, connecting with other movements, we should definitely focus on ideas, on concepts, make them clear if they are not simple to use, like the Green New Deal. It looks like it makes sense, but it could actually be, it could be about greenwashing. So we need to make it more concrete and more real. Campaigning for ideas collectively on a continental level is, I think, the best way to get rid of the problem of being the Varoufakis international gig, or being the support group for some local politician. And actually, it is only when you have gained that sort of power as a campaign, as an international group, that you might be able to negotiate with local forces in things like local elections. So I'm not saying that we should never consider that, but I do insist on the fact that we should fight for some words or some sentences that make sense in the world we now live in, and that I think that this could be the good approach. Campaigning for mottos, etc., slogans, good slogans.
Great, Costanza. You're muted. There you go.
Yes, I agree very much with what Germinal was saying. If we want the movement to be considered as such, we need to move as a movement. And this connects also with what you were asking before about elections, or like being an electoral party, being a party, or being a movement. I think that in this sense, DiEM25 needs to be both, and it really depends on the conditions on the ground. So this question that we have been asking ourselves for months, I think it's something that is going to really depend on the situation in the specific countries. And that's another reason, of course, why DSCs and NCs are so important, because there is not one recipe that is good for everybody. It's going to be needed. We're going to have one worldview that we want to push, but we need to decline it in different ways depending on the different countries. So, like, for example, what do I mean when I say we act as a movement or we act as a party? It's very different, but in the same time is connected. When we act as a movement, if we don't have the strength to run ourselves, we still need to create a brand for ourselves to make clear what our positions are at a larger scale, and to try and push our ideas inside the existing parties already, right? Or at least to shape the conversation. I think this is what DiEM25 needs to do most importantly. The DiEM25 needs to have that role of creating the conversation, which is not what we're doing. And in general, it's not what the left is doing in Europe right now. We are basically following what the conversation has been started by sovereignists or the right or whatever it is. And in this sense, I think the United States and some currents inside the Democratic Party are a good example. And the Green New Deal itself is a great example of something that the grassroots movement were able to push as an idea, and then to have the mainstream politics and the mainstream media somehow forced to discuss something that was not on the table before. So in terms of DiEM25 as a movement, I think this is what we need to do, to find our battles. It doesn't need to be as big as a battle as the Green New Deal all the time. It can be something smaller or more focused. And we need to work together to do campaigns at the same time to make sure that we put this on the table. And then in the countries where we have the strength, then I think it's more than right that we try to compete ourselves in elections. But again, it really depends. Each country has a different electoral law. Each country has different power balances. So I think there is not just one answer for this. But I think that if we really focus on the issues and on campaigns that are focused on the issues, we can raise the I'm going to say brand, which I know it's not a nice word and liked by many, but the name recognition and the brand of DiEM25, which is what we need. We need to be, first of all, an actor that is recognized, and that is recognized as a collective actor and not just, you know, the fan club or whatever it is, which also I think it's somehow unfair, right? Because I think the grassroots part and the movement and the activists are really active. So sometimes let's also not take on ourselves what our you know, opponents try to push on us, right?
Great point. Okay, we are about to wrap up. So for closing statements, I would like to ask you, as a CC candidate, what would be the first thing you would push for within the CC? And we'll close with that. And Pawel, you get an extra 30 seconds, and Germinal, you get about 1 minute more than the rest, so we can have about the same time that everybody spoke. So who wants to start? Michele, do you want to start?
Wait, yes. 30 seconds, you said.
So let's say about a minute,
Okay.
but
the first thing I would try to propose to the CC is to organize 2 campaigns, pan-European campaigns. One about the minimum salary, European minimum salary, connected also with maybe the idea of the 35 hours per week as a goal that we could have in all Europe, namely progressively, but yes. And the other about the universal dividendum. And of course, talking about European statute for the workers as an underlying common narrative of the 2 things. And this because exactly what we're saying, Pawel, Costanza, Brice, but I think also Germinal, we need to focus on campaign on our strong issues, on our ideas, and we need to empower our DSCs, our militants, with clear points that we can use to talk to the people outside of the movement. And by doing these campaigns, we can pave the way for the citizen assembly, for the pan-European referendum, the constituent assembly in one side, and the other side pave the way also to compete in election where possible, as Costanza was saying.
Thank you. Thank you. Great. Pawel.
Thank you. And now that I have an extra 30 seconds, I might link my closing statement to 2 things that Costanza said, one of which I agree with profoundly, and the other one of which I don't necessarily agree with. So what I don't agree with is the idea that we're not setting the tone of the debate. I think that's exactly what the Green New Deal campaign is doing right now. It's very much about making sure that our ideas come front and center in the minds of anyone talking about the climate. And we're not quite there yet, but we're increasingly seeing that our ideas are mentioned alongside any kind of climate activism in Europe when you look at various publications talking about the Green New Deal. So we're getting there. And I think the task now is to make sure that the DM as a whole can work as effectively in raising awareness and mass consciousness about its program. Where I agree deeply, and this is linked to the first thing I would do as a CC member, is about the need to achieve coherence between various elements and various groupings within DM. I've been often asked, as the coordinator of the Green New Deal campaign, whether we're a part of DM or we're part of MERA, and whether MERA is a part of DM or it's separate, whether we're part of European Spring and European Spring is a different name for DM, and all of the other parts of European Spring are also DM. No one really understands the system. And part of it is that we haven't been very good at communicating it. But part of it, which is something I've also been learning a lot on the campaign, is that you need to have a grip on your visual language. Visual language matters so much, and so many activists don't appreciate that. And so you need to have coherence in the way you communicate your ideas. You need to have coherence in the way you appear to the outside world. So you can't have 15 logos on a page. You can't have a map with different kind of party names. You can't have various spellings of your movement in different countries. And that's one thing, I mean, I hate them to bits, but that's one thing that Volt did incredibly well. They chose one word, one design, one strategy for the whole of Europe, and people recognized them very quickly. So the first thing I would do is I would start a conversation about what our identity is as a movement, because I think everyone needs to be involved in it. And then I would take the steps to make sure we bring in incredible designers to help work with us in ensuring coherence across the movement, so we can communicate that whatever identity we decide on with the outside world.
Thanks. Great, great point. Germinal.
Yeah, I didn't get. I have 1 minute less than 30 seconds, or I have 1 minute.
No,
plus
you
30
have
seconds.
about 2 to 3 minutes.
Okay, well, that's a lot. I don't know if I'm gonna bore everyone with 3 minutes of goodbye or something like that. No, I will. Actually, the first thing I'm going to, as we say in French, we love that silly expression. I'm going to bounce on what Pawel has just said regarding branding, as Costanza said. I come from a movement in France because I have left Génération because I disagree with the electoral strategy for the forthcoming months. And now I'm focusing only on DM25. I've left that movement saying to people that one of the problems it faces, and that it's brought within the campaign, when we had all these names like the European Spring, DM25, Génération, and then Vive l'Europe Libre, etc. It was a complete mess, and there were logos everywhere. And yes, a lot of people did not understand what we were. And on top of everything, a lot of people didn't understand who we were as a group that was, promoting the Green New Deal. That was, of course, it was told about. It was used as a name, but not enough. And on top of that, nobody could really know that we were a pro-European, anti-austerity left. So I don't have the fantastic idea of a name that would, say all this on a continental level, and possibly, that could be taken by people internationally. And I think we should have a debate on that. But yes, that could be the massive project of the first 6 months of a new CC, creating, organizing, and understanding and getting the essence of the debate on what does it mean to have a new internationalist left today on this continent and on this planet. And as I use these words, internationalist left, well, they sound very, very much 20th century. If someone comes up with something better, well, I hope it comes out of this debate, because I think that is it's a very important thing. Okay, naming things, naming exactly what we want to do, how we want to do it, and debating around it. I think we have the whole picture of what what the new CC should kickstart. I mean, it should kickstart. I don't think it is a refoundation or something like that, but it's if you consider the situation now, right now, yes, it is the foundation of this connection system that could, yes, as Brice said, that could be at the center of a lot of other social movement, something that could appear, for example, in the climate marches and not look like another party trying to gain power through the march, but just something that could be a connector, a catalyzer, as a lot of people like to say, within these marches. To cut a long story short, I mean, I would, as a member of the CC, I would try to make us within the precarity situation, the austerity situation, within climate change, and within democracy and equality on the continent, meaning real equality of people with or without legal documents. I would like to be I would like the CC to spark something that would make us DM the connector of between all these elements and something that makes the idea of an internationalist left comprehensible. I think I went well over 3 minutes.
Thank you. Just 4 minutes. It's fine. Costanza, your closing statements.
Okay, I finally remember to unmute myself. Okay, so my experience and my skill is in political communication. So the first thing that I would do if I was on the CC would be very much in line with what I was saying before, what Germinal was saying, and Pawel as well. We need to strengthen communication, two senses. One in sense of the outreach, and this is what we were discussing before. We need to put our ideas out. Every time that there is a big debate in Europe, we need to make DM voice heard and part of the discussion. So as a great American author said, if you don't have a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. We need to bring a folding chair every time there is a table. And then we need to strengthen communication with the DSCs. As we said many times in this discussion, I would want to have first a set of guidelines for new DSCs to be created. As I was mentioning, I served as point of contact for creation of new DSCs in the Americas, and it's difficult when people are starting from scratch and don't have guidelines, and then to have an agenda of like meetings and Zoom calls with all the DSCs in a rotating way. So this way there is more of like knowing each other is also helpful when there is the need to launch a campaign, right? So at least we know who the others are, what they're working on, etc. And then on the other side, my pet peeve would be to relaunch the Progressive International, as we were saying before, because I really think it's one of the most important parts of DM, and it must not be abandoned.
Thank you. And Brice, we'll close with you.
Well, I guess the first thing we should do as a new CC is to record our official meetings. We have to be held accountable for what we do. There can be no trust if people cannot actually see what we say and hear what we say. Of course, it brings a lot of issues about the secrecy of our strategies. And sometimes when we go into massive transnational civil disobedience actions, we need secrecy to create the strategy, obviously. But for the general meetings, I think it is totally important that we implement these open meetings that everyone can attend and anyone can attend. We have to create the parallel world, the parallel system that we want to implement in society afterward. And if in our utopia we have transparency, then in the utopia that we build and that we experiment in everyday life, we have to have transparency. We need that. And the second step would be the DSC assemblies, reorganizing of the organizing principles, and obviously working on the Green New Deal campaign.
Great. Thank you. I would like to thank you all for joining. I would like to thank all the several members who joined here on Zoom, and also the dozens that, that joined on Facebook. Special thanks to all those who made this available. This video will be recorded and will be made available, and we welcome all DM members to share it. We hope that the viewers got a better understanding of all the CC candidates, their viewpoints, and we hope that this video helps them, help viewers form a better opinion on the CC candidates. All this to have a more informed vote and to be able to allow us draw our own conclusions of what the CC is, what the CC candidates will represent and will stand for in the future. Thanks again to all those who joined, and special thanks to all those who made this possible behind the scenes. Rosita has been moderating this on the backstage, and I would like to especially thank her for making sure that I know what to ask next. So with that, I will stop the recording, and thanks again for the candidates who joined here.
Ευχαριστώ, Aris.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Ciao, ciao.
Thanks a
Merci.
lot.
Thank you to all.
Cheers.